Hello and welcome. It's Neil Dougan here, and we're looking at the mind and emotions, the science section. So we're actually going to have a look at what is some of the science behind what we're doing. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the actual science of the treatment, and then we're going to look at the actual science of the mind and emotions component. So the treatment that we're doing, utilising within TRIM, is effectively suggestion, working with suggestions. Now these suggestions, as you'll come to realise when we have a look a bit further into the topic of mind and emotions, are being addressed not only to your conscious mind but also your subconscious mind, but equally to all of the unconscious processes that are going on within your body. So for example, cell division, metabolism, sugar metabolism, fat metabolism. All of these things we're actually addressing through the medium of suggestions. What I'd like to actually have a look at now is defining for you really the layers of your being that we're operating with. So I think it's very important that you actually have a framework for this. So what we're looking at is the physical body and its chemical functioning. So we're looking at a bunch of chemicals that are made up into a bunch of cells, which are made up into a bunch of organs and body parts, and which are all organized within systems. So that's the actual physical body and the actual body level. And as I mentioned, we are looking at the mind aspects of all of these parts of the body, all the way down to the cell, or even the the parts of the cells, in fact. A further aspect of your being is the mind, and when I'm talking about the mind, I'm talking about the intellect, so the intelligence part of our being, but I'm also talking about the emotions, and I'm also talking about further the practical aspects of our intelligence. So we have the sort of mind mathematics type of intelligence. We have this intelligence of emotions where we can be having empathy and love and all these kinds of things that we're doing. So there's an emotional intelligence or emotional mind aspect, but we can also see that there is a mind aspect which is practical, that allows you to do practical things and perform in practical types of ways. A further aspect of your being is your spirit, and for most scientists, of course, the idea of the spirit, it is a construct of your mind, and your mind is a construct of your body. And this actually leads me on beautifully to the principle of upward causation, which is the common model within science. And of course, with the kind of work that I'm doing here and the TRIM program is based around, we're actually looking at a downwards causation. So we're looking at a spiritual level having a design or a blueprint aspect over a mind level of organisation, which in turn actually has a blueprint or organisational function over the purely physical. So we're looking at a top-down causation model within the type of work that we're doing here. So what I'd like to look at now is the concept that a cell could actually be thinking. So as far as the approach that I'm taking within the treatment program, I'm looking at right the way down to the cell or even the subcellular functioning of the body having a thinking process. So clearly a single cell doesn't think about Plato or Beethoven or something like that. However, the cell does carry out almost all of the functions of what you would consider to be thinking. And in that way, there's a whole entire decision-making processes going on. In fact, there are tens of thousands of decision-making processes going on within a single cell at any time. But so we're talking about every second that's going on. So given that it's actually making these decisions, it's actually bringing in data, it's assembling the data against parameters which it actually holds, it's making decisions, it's adapting, it's changing in every respect for how we would consider and we would contemplate the concept of thinking. A cell can be seen to be thinking. One of the really incredible things that has come out of some of the modern scientific research, that we're talking about research within the the normal academic environment, has actually been the ways in which the cells communicate. So we're comfortable with the idea that a cell might communicate by producing a hormone. So that whole notion of an endocrine, as they're called, communication from one cell to another cell, And indeed, you get aggregates of cells. So for example, the pancreas has one of its functions, it produces insulin. And so all of these cells within the pancreas are communicating with other cells up in the brain, in the hypothalamus, information about what's going on with sugar metabolism. This is a very common example that people are familiar with. So we can think about a cell communicating via the endocrine system. We can also think about a cell communicating via electrical signaling. So for example, a cell can be sending out chemicals which are picked up by a nerve, and then the nerves are actually transmitting it to other parts of the body, and the cells which are in that destination part of the body are able to act either via the brain or via the spine or however else it's actually been done. But there's a potential for the cells to be communicating in that way. Now, I mentioned some remarkable new evidence which has come to light about ways in which the cells communicate. What they've found is that the cell membrane, so we're talking about the outer shell of the cell, acts like a radio transmitter, and it actually produces electromagnetic frequency radiation. Now, if you're familiar with these sorts of concepts, these are not point-to-point communications, these are broadcasts. So each cell is continually broadcasting information out to the wider environment. And they've managed to determine within the laboratory that cells in a remote part of the foot of your body, like the foot, are able to actually be transmitting information directly, not via the nervous system, not via the endocrine system, none of these things, but directly to cells within the brain. And the import of this is incredible, and I want you to take a moment to actually contemplate this. It means that a cell within the foot is able to communicate directly via a broadcast to a cell in the brain. Now, it doesn't take too many sort of addings up here to realize that there is just a terrific amount of communication going on around the body utilizing this type of technique. There's about 30 trillion cells within your body. There's another 70 or 80 trillion bacteria within your body. Nobody's really bothered to try and work out how many viruses there are in your body. All of them are continually talking to each other. Every one of these cells, every one of these viruses, every one of these bacteria, they're all talking to each other continuously. A further extension of this concept, of course, is that if these cells are talking to each other within my body, if you're standing here in the room with me, then there's every reason to expect that the cells within your body are hearing the information from my body. And indeed, this is one of the fundamental underpinning concepts with the work that we do within the treatment processes that we do here in the clinic. So we can see that the cell can be seen to think and to communicate, so otherwise it's doing the thinking and it's doing the talking, and another cell's doing the listening. So what we need to consider now is actually how they're collaborating, how they're cooperating. So with this information which is being shared around the body, these collections of cells collaborate and cooperate together, and it's a feat of remarkable beauty how the body is able to have these trillions of cells actually communicating and coordinating with one another. And indeed, in my opinion, the counter of this idea of cooperation and collaboration, which is so much of our culture based around, which is competition, is so far removed from the everyday activities within our body and within the community of microorganisms which make up our physical body. So if we're thinking about my physical body, you could say roughly a third of it are my own cells, and the other 2/3 are made up of foreigners. This is the bacteria, let alone the viruses. So what I have to look at now is actually how the thoughts actually manage to influence the cell, the actual cellular functioning. There's a couple of ways that can happen, and indeed, this is well demonstrated within science. Firstly is what's known as the field of epigenetics, and epigenetics refers to matters which are associated with the DNA function. So we're not talking about changes to the DNA itself, although it can be viewed in a way that it is actually a change to the DNA. But more specifically, what we're looking at is we're looking at the ways in which the DNA function can be interfered with. And you know, depending on how good your high school science is, or perhaps we've got scientists who are watching this video, but there's a potential for the DNA strand, the big long strand of the DNA. So inside every cell is an exact copy of the DNA, which is exactly the same as every other cell within your body. Each strand of DNA is around about 2 meters long, and you know, here's a useful bit of trivia for you. If you were to take every piece of DNA out of your body and add them end to end, you could stretch them between here and the sun and back again 23 times. So there's a tremendous length of this DNA that's actually existing within your body. The DNA itself, as I say, is identical from cell to cell, but the way in which the DNA is expressed and how it's functioning and the purposes that it's actually being put to within the cell is totally different from cell to cell, and these epigenetic factors interfere with how the cell is actually going about its business. So these little chemicals called methyl groups actually add themselves on. So here's the DNA coming along. Little methyl group comes along and adds itself on to the length of the DNA. When the RNA process is occurring and it's copying off the DNA strand, it meets this methyl group and it can't work. If this methyl group has actually added itself onto a position where a protein, a particularly important protein, is being manufactured within the cell, then it can't do it. It actually can't make that protein, and the cellular function is completely impaired as a result of this. Now, these methyl groups are strongly related to stress processes within the body. So, for example, you know, highly emotionally charged thoughts, emotional things, experiences, events, belief systems, very strongly emotionally charged belief systems, all of them will have the effect of encouraging the addition of these methyl groups actually onto the DNA. It's absolutely incredible how this occurs. So the thoughts, particularly these thoughts which have got strong emotional charges associated with them, impact directly on how the DNA is actually producing proteins, you know, via the RNA process. So, you know, there's a number of steps in the process there, but the end result is that the actual proteins aren't manufactured. Now, I've glossed over a whole heap of science here, and indeed these epigenetic factors can be impacting directly on the DNA. There is actually epigenetic factors on the RNA process as well. There is DNA within the nucleus of the cell. There's also DNA within the mitochondria, and all of these, this DNA and the RNA, can actually be impeded or impacted upon by these epigenetic processes. So the next major way that we can easily see, so like there's hundreds of different ways in which the thoughts can actually impact upon the cellular functioning, but I want to just talk about a couple of these very important ones. So the second major one that people are aware of is stress. So if we consider what's going on within the brain and the brain-like functions all throughout the body, then stress will have the effect of changing completely, totally and utterly changing the balance of the stress hormones, the actual hormones functionings within the brain. And as a result, nearly every other function within the body will be impacted. So there are very specific connections that are going on, and there are also very general connections going on between the stress that you're feeling. So this is all of the stress around daily life and our emotional life and things like that. And it's a pure chemical change that's going on in your brain and in the brain-like tissues around your body. Now, you may or may not be aware of this, but there are brain-like tissues scattered all around your body. So the famous one that people talk about at the moment is in the small intestines, and they're talking about the small intestines being the second brain of the body. There's over 20 million neurons, which is brain cells, actually within the small intestines, and the small intestines are continually thinking and communicating information to the rest of the body and to the brain in particular. So the next thing that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is all well and good, all that stuff occurring, and we can see how thoughts are actually impacting on the body, but what about weight? Most of the people who are watching this video are people who are concerned about metabolism and weight and their energy system. So they're interested in how much energy they've got, they're interested in how much weight they're holding. So the first principle that I want to cover is the concept of homeostasis. So I think everybody's familiar with the idea of a balance point. So you've got factors which are weighing on how your biological functioning is operating, and it's going like this all the time. And there's this concept of a set point. So for example, balance might be in a position like this. So we've got two chemical functionings going on within the body, and the homeostatic point might be here. What if the situation is that if we're more healthy and we've got a better weight management, that the homeostatic balance is like this? Well, what we're talking about there is the set point. The thoughts, all of your thoughts within your system, have an incredibly powerful and specific impact on all these balance points, of which there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, within your system. So, once again, we can go back to the one that many people are familiar with, which is the concept of insulin management and sugar metabolism in particular. And we know that there are functioning within the pancreas, which is an organ in your abdomen, and there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and in huge simplicity, because it's a very, very complex system, but there's a balance point occurring between functioning up here in the hypothalamus and functioning occurring down here in the pancreas. As I say, there's many other organs and body parts actually involved in the cycle, but anyway, we won't go into all of that detail. So depending on what's going on with the thought processes, the signaling that's going on here in the hypothalamus and the brain could be off. And so here we go. Our balance is, instead of it being here, our balance is like this. So you can see that a system, a homeostatic set point, which is relating to a system, can be impacted upon by these thoughts, the whole process of thinking. The next question are what's known as biofeedback loops. So we've talked a little bit about insulin. We'll use that example again. And the pancreas knows to produce so much insulin because it's being told to do so by chemicals that are being produced up in the brain. The pancreas is also being impacted by signaling coming from many other parts of the body as well. But, once again, we don't want to overcomplicate the situation. So these feedback loops can be interfered with by the thoughts as well. So all of these feedback loops can actually be impacted upon. The extent to which information is shared is impacted upon by thoughts as well, or the level of the mind. And so we'll go back to our pancreas and our hypothalamus, and generally speaking, we're talking about these hormones being released into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream being detected, these levels of these hormones being detected up in the brain, and then further hormones being injected back into the bloodstream, as well as nervous signals that are coming from the brain as well being transmitted. So we're talking about the actual communication processes, all of the ways that information could be shared. And as I say, this is just one example of millions of these sorts of communication processes that are going on with your body at any one time. All of them, every single one of them, can be impacted upon by the level of the thought. In medicine, the normal way, I'm still talking about standard Western medicine here, the standard way of looking at things is we look for the broken part. So, for example, somebody is suffering from a disease like diabetes. I know we've been going on a lot about the insulin management system, but nonetheless, it's a good example. So somebody has diabetes, depending on which type of diabetes. There are a range of diabetes that you can have, but one of the typical forms of diabetes that you can get means that the hypothalamus is not actually hearing the chemical signaling that's coming in. So in Western medicine, what we'll do is we'll say hypothalamus is not reading the levels of the insulin, therefore we'll insert a drug which is going to turn up the volume or the sensitivity on the hypothalamus so that it's hearing the signaling better. Within the type of approach that we're doing here, what we're saying is that there's no point in actually just looking at a single broken part. what we're much more interested in doing is actually seeing how the whole system can actually get itself back into a process of coordination and harmony. So we're looking for that harmony to actually be re-established. And this is a fundamental difference between the standard Western medical approach and the type of approach that we are applying here within TRIM. Okay, well look, there's an awful lot to be going on with there and amongst all of that material. I've only scratched the surface of the matter of mind and emotions and how they're actually impacting on the management of your weight. Indeed, I've really been looking at the bigger framework that can be looked at, and I urge you and welcome you to post questions that you might have up onto the Facebook group, and we can go into and we can explore to whatever extent that you're comfortable to do so, any of these actual physical matters that are going on within your body. And I've given a summary on the mind and emotions page there, so week 1 mind and emotions. Near the bottom of the page there you'll be able to see a description of the physical parts of the body which we're particularly focusing on and their systems. This will be much expanded as we're going through the following weeks that actually come on from here, so it'll be grown upon, one upon the other, upon the other. And one of the things that I was asked just the other day is why have we got this particular order for the implementation of the treatment within TRIM, and the reason for it is that I need the actual information to be delivered in such a way that your body will be able to understand the layering of this information. So we've got all these layers of information one upon the other. So we're beginning at this mind and emotions level. As I say, it's really the very physical view of the concept of mind and emotions, and it's the mind and emotions of a single cell or even a part of a cell that we're looking at. So thanks for watching this. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of questions, and I look forward to seeing them on the Facebook group. Thanks very much.